So the two of us plucked out that $20, and we legitimately found $20.
That's how the plague began to spread.
Yeah, right. It's a 4-time better story than my previous story when I only found $5.
I'm not sure that's how stories work.
All right, so let's get started. We are required by law to do some follow-up.
Are we?
A friend of the show, allegedly, a friend of the show, Guy Rambo, has discovered an expansion slot utility app in Catalina, which is for the new Mac Pro. And I think we had seen a screenshot of this. I feel like I've seen this before somewhere, but this had more information that I'd seen previously. And so tell me, gentlemen, what this is about. So I don't pay attention to the internals of PCs anymore, or computers anymore, because I just buy whatever sized laptop or desktop I want. I haven't had to worry about a tower since like college. So what is happening here? This is arranging PCI cards in the most efficient way possible?
So first of all, this is version 2 of this utility, because version 1 of this utility was made for John's computer. And actually the one right before it, because it's a way, and I don't know, John, was there even one before this for like G5s and stuff?
There were similar things, but they only told you how you were doing. They would show you all your expansion slots and memory slots and everything, and show you what's in them, and then it would scold you if you have put things in non-optimal places. And this is different, though.
Okay, so there's a couple things going on here. Number one is, when you have desktop components, you have a lot of slots, and people can kind of arrange things as they want, as opposed to like, an iMac is kind of always, optimized in the right way and everything. There's been a couple of things over time where, like, for certain chipsets, there's like an optimal number of RAM sticks, or it has to be like a multiple of 2 or 3 or something to get optimal performance, because there's like 2 or 3 memory controllers. And there's similar things, although that work a little bit differently, with PCI Express lanes and PCI Express lane allocations for different slots and different parts. Now, we don't have to worry about PCI Express lanes on most Macs, because they allocate the lanes when they design the computers, and there's no slots, and so you can't change how they're allocated. You occasionally will see some part of the internal limitations or designs will leak out in ways like how not all of the Thunderbolt ports on all of the laptops have equal bandwidth. Like they'll have there's the K-base articles that say like on the 13-inch MacBook Pro with 4 slots, like the left 2 will have more bandwidth than the right 2, or something like that, right? PCI Express, the communication protocol used between most high-speed peripherals and things these days inside computers, and actually Thunderbolt is basically PCI Express over a cable. PCI Express has a certain number of lanes that come out of the CPU, and every CPU family has a different number of these. One of the reasons why the high-end computers use Xeons is because Xeons tend to have more PCI Express lanes than the consumer chips, and the laptops, like the reason why the Escape only has 2 Thunderbolt ports, and the bigger MacBook Pros have 4, and why the 12-inch only has 1 port and it isn't even Thunderbolt, is all related to like each of those chips from Intel has a certain number of PCI Express lanes that it offers, and how you allocate those lanes to different parts, it's up to the engineer of the computer. Anyway, the new Mac Pro has a lot of PCI Express lanes. I think it has like 32 or 48 coming out of the CPU, something like that. But if you add up all the amount of PCI Express lanes that all of its slots and built-in peripherals need, it's way more than that. So they do a few tricks to allocate these things. The main thing is that they have a bridge chip in there, and I don't know the details of it, but I know there is one there. I was told they actually are using a bridge or some kind of switch or something like that, like a PCI Express multiplier, basically, that can allocate. It can offer more lanes to peripherals than what the CPU actually has available, and then you can kind of allocate how those work. And I think what this is telling us with this utility, I think you can actually maybe dynamically allocate them, as opposed to just like, oh, you have to move this card to this other slot every time. But there are also certain slots that have more lanes available to them than others. And so what this utility is telling us is like, there's going to be certain configurations where like certain cards you put in there, they don't need meaningful bandwidth. Things like, a USB port card doesn't need much. An audio card, like just for sound in and out, doesn't need much. But like a GPU needs a lot. Certain other kinds of cards need more or less. And so this utility is there to basically tell you, the user, when you have plugged something into a slot that is not offering it the amount of lanes it needs, and can make recommendations to you of where to move it. And it like the example screenshot said, like, move this card from slot 5 to slot 3 or something like that. And all this is to get around the fact that you don't actually have enough PCI Express lanes in a Mac Pro to allocate full bandwidth to all of its slots. And that's not Apple cheaping out in some way. That's simply limitations on the Xeon CPUs that Intel offers for this computer.
And apparently there's 2 pools of bandwidth. Again, probably getting back to the switch type thing, where there's a bunch of radio buttons where you can change. You can't change the speed of the slots. An 8x slot, a 4x slot, like they're labeled and it's fixed. But you can change which pool those lanes are allocated to, and presumably you're trying to strike some kind of balance. There's also a checkbox that says automatic bandwidth configuration that will theoretically, divvy stuff up into pools according to what the computer thinks is best. But for most of the modern history of Apple's slotted computers in the PowerPC era and later, if you put something in a non-optimal slot, whether it be RAM or PCR cards or whatever, usually on the first boot, some dialog from a similar utility to this will pop up and tell you that you've put things in a suboptimal place. Sometimes you just dismiss that and it will never bother you again. Sometimes it'll pop up every time, depending on how dire the situation is. But this utility, like everything else having to do with the Mac Pro, is getting bigger and fancier.
We are sponsored this week by Squarespace. Start building your website today at squarespace.com/ATP and enter offer code ATP at checkout to get 10% off. Make your next move with a beautiful website from Squarespace. Squarespace makes it super easy to make awesome, highly functional, well-designed websites that you don't have to worry about. You don't have to support them. You don't have to maintain them. You don't have to upgrade their software or worry if they're going to get a lot of traffic, if they're going to be able to hold up to the traffic and not go down. Squarespace sites are just super easy. You create it in a very beautiful way. It's easy to use, all live previewing. What you see is what you get editing. You can customize the themes and colors to your heart's content. And it's all with no coding required. So no matter what your skill level is, you can make a Squarespace site. They make it super easy for anyone to do, from beginners to advanced. And they have all sorts of rich functionality built in that's as easy as just like dragging blocks around to make it work. Things like, galleries and podcasts and storefronts and all sorts of things that are actually pretty hard to code yourself or to build yourself if you aren't using Squarespace. But Squarespace makes everything like this super easy. They back it up with award-winning support if you need any help with anything, although honestly, it's so easy you probably won't. Everything is just super easy at Squarespace, and it's just a pleasure to use. You can get so much done in so little time. So start your free trial site to see for yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. You can start a free trial with no credit card required at squarespace.com/ATP. Build a site, see how you like it. When you want to sign up, go back there, squarespace.com/ATP, and use offer code ATP to get 10% off your first purchase. Once again, squarespace.com/ATP, code ATP for 10% off your first purchase. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring our show. Make your next move with a beautiful website from Squarespace.
All right, so big week.
A little bit.
So we got word, what was it, the day after we recorded last week, I think it was, as is oft to happen.
I was thinking about that, by the way. Like, our show is kind of sort of intentionally on Wednesday because Apple does lots of announcements on Tuesdays, but Apple announces good news on Tuesdays. Apple does not announce bad news on Tuesdays. So I think we've struck the right balance, and I'd rather have the show like right after the good news comes out. I'm fine with waiting, almost a week to talk about the bad news. So here we are.
So the news, which may or may not be bad, is that Jony Ive is officially leaving Apple. He is going to start his own consultancy, which is called, Love From, I believe, or something like that.
Terrible name. Yes, that's what it's called.
It is a truly terrible name, but it is what it is.
It doesn't matter what the name is.
No, it doesn't.
It's Jony Ive's design firm. That's it.
Yeah, design companies always have weird names anyway.
Yeah,
it's a thing.
Yeah, it's like ad agencies. Like it's like these are not names that the public tends to see.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so he's going to start this new design firm, and Mark Newsom is going to. Is that right? I believe I read that somewhere.
I believe that's right, and I think Richard Howarth also.
Oh, is that right?
Like it seems like Ive, Howarth, and Mark Newsom. I think it seems like they all might have left together.
Interesting. So one way or another, Apple was quick to point out that Apple will be consulting with Love From, or whatever it's called. Apple will be a client. All is well, everyone. Don't worry. Everything's okay. Don't look behind the curtain. And then they have announced that Evans Henke is going to be head of industrial design, and we'll talk about her a little bit more in a minute. And Alan Dye is going to be the VP of human interface design, and we'll talk about him a little more in a minute. Before we discuss the two of them, though, what are your guys' initial impressions? I actually recorded an episode of Clockwise earlier today where this was one of the subjects, and I feel like if you look at the tea leaves for the last several years, and I think Ben Thompson was the first one I noticed to get kind of in front of this, it sure seems like Ive has been moseying his way out the door for the last several years. And there was a semi-explosive piece from the Wall Street Journal, I believe it was, where they said basically Jony Ive's a big turd and is blowing off meetings left and right, and he's caused strife and blah, blah, blah. And then Tim Cook responded saying, oh, no, none of that's true, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know what's going on here. All you can do is guess, but it seems to me like this is mostly a non-event, but I don't know. One of you guys convinced me that I'm wrong, and let's start with Marco.
Well, before we start with Marco, we were out in front of this. Don't give Ben Thompson credit for this. I went back and listened to make sure. We haven't talked about this in a long time, and it's mostly because back in the episode when he had his title change, we all basically wrote him off. It's like, well, that's it. He's on his way out in everything, but and it took a while for it to happen. I don't remember what episode that was, but I did go back and dig it out, and I think it's part of the reason we haven't really talked about, other than occasionally invoking his name as an expletive when complaining about some piece of hardware or whatever, which is something that I think we'll talk about. We've mostly not discussed him in the same way that we've discussed other Apple executives, because I think we collectively wrote him off back when we did that show, and this hasn't come up again. I mean, I went back and listened to the audio, and that was my impression. That was everyone's take, really. What was it? He got changed to like Chief Design Officer, CDO, or something.
Yeah.
So anyway, go on, Marco. I didn't mean to interrupt you and your mute switch that you're fighting with.
No, it's fine. Thank you for your correction, John.
I think this isn't nothing. I don't think it's as big of a deal as a lot of people think, because again, I do think, as John said, that this seems to have been in the works for years. We've heard bits and pieces here and there of Johnny kind of slowly backing away and being less and less involved in day to day. And I think the announcement of his promotion to the Chief Design Officer, I think, was a very clear move. Like, Jony Ive, who is the head of industrial design, no longer is involved in day-to-day management from that point. It's like, okay, well, then what is he doing? If he's not day-to-day managing, that's usually, that person's just not really working here anymore. And I understand from a lot of reports that it wasn't quite so severe in this case, but clearly it was a step in the direction of him, ascending into the sky and slowly, leaving Apple. It has seemed for a while that he was probably experiencing severe burnout, that he might have been creatively bored and wanting to explore other areas. He was known to have played major roles in the design of Apple Park and a lot of the details of Apple Park, like interior details. Didn't he also design like the desks and the chairs and stuff? Like he did a bunch of stuff. He's a designer. He's a creative person. There's only so much you can do. There's only so many iPhones you can design before you get bored and want to do other things. And he very clearly, for years, has been extremely interested in branching out into other areas of product design. He did like that Christmas tree a few years ago, remember? I think also in collaboration with Mark Newson. He did obviously the Apple Watch and a lot of the Apple Watch bands and stuff like that. There was a good discussion about this on the talk show this week with John Gruber, with Ben Thompson as the guest. They talked a lot about this stuff of like basically, you have somebody like Jony Ive, a professional designer and a well-known, world-renowned designer. They want to do other things, and he especially seems very interested in the world of like high design. I guess if there's like a thing like high fashion, but for design, I don't know. I don't know what that world is called, but like the world of like high-profile design, where like he's not going to be, you're not going to be able to hire him. His studio is going to do like whatever he wants. He doesn't need your money. He's going to do like fun stuff that is shown off like in hoity-toity exhibitions and places like Sotheby's and stuff like that's where his stuff's going to go. You're not going to be able to go to Target next year and buy a Jony Ive toaster. Like, nope, that's not at all the kind of stuff he's likely to be doing. So creatively, I think he clearly has wanted to do other things for years now. Apple was able to keep him going with things like the watch for a while longer. I think that extended his time there. But ultimately, it's kind of like when somebody is unhappy with a job, you can offer them more money and they might stay for a little while longer, but ultimately, like, they're going to leave. You're just like buying a little bit of time, maybe. Mm-hmm. And so similarly, it's like Jony Ive clearly both was suffering from severe burnout and also clearly wanted to design other things that Apple would never make. Things like, well, I was going to say things like cars, but maybe not. Maybe that was a bad example.
That's one of the things that we talked about, I think, when going back and listening to that episode was what kind of things, would keep someone like Jony Ive around after he's already made the iPhone and the iPod and the iMac and stuff like that. I don't think Apple Park was something we discussed because maybe that wasn't a thing on our minds at that point. But we think we did talk about the car, as in that's something you could do to keep, because he is into cars and it's very unlike computers, right? But, in the end, I mean, A, nothing car related has shipped yet other than CarPlay. And B, like you said, Marco, like that's extending your timeline for sure, but it's not really satisfying whatever the itch is.
Exactly. And Jony Ive had a high public profile for Apple, and it would have looked bad for Apple if he just all of a sudden left one day with no warning. And so his exit was designed. It was very carefully staged out over years. And this is Apple clearly has a way that they do succession planning. Back when Steve was around, like, they knew when it became clear that Steve's health was failing and that he might not make it, I think they very carefully staged out the public introduction of Tim Cook as the new CEO until it was time to actually execute the transition. And then when Steve ultimately died, we like the public and the shareholders and the markets and the press, we were introduced to that transition gradually, and so it wasn't as big of a shock. And like, Apple wasn't, immediately, quote, doomed or anything like that. Like, for the most part, like, the market was okay. The stock didn't totally tank, like when Tim took over or when Steve actually did die. It was mostly a smooth transition. Jony Ive had such a high profile, not quite Steve Jobs high, but still very high. And so for him to leave had to be staged out very carefully with the press, with the markets, with public perception. It was clear he was going to leave or burn out at some point, soon. So I think that was what this chief design officer thing was. Clearly, they knew then he was leaving. That was just part of it. I think we're also seeing this transition now. I think we're seeing that Jeff Williams is the backup for Tim Cook. Whether Tim Cook is going to retire or leave anytime soon, I don't know. I don't think this indicates that either way, but I do think we are seeing now Jony Ive was slowly escalated into the sky, and now he's just poof disappearing. And and by the way, this thing about he's now a consultant to Apple, and Apple's going to be a customer of his. That's nothing. Like, nothing's going to come out of that. Like, maybe he might design like a watch band or something, but like Jony Ive is not going to be designing major Apple products anymore. Like, that's not what this is. That's PR. That's spin, and it worked, and that's great. But like, Jony Ive is no longer designing things for Apple in the sense that any of us would expect. The whole thing about like, oh, now he's a consultant, that's a smokescreen. I was a consultant too. Yeah, I never was consulted. But anyway, so they have done that. They did that with Steve to Tim. They did it with Jony to the sky, and now I think they are also clearly preparing the public for Jeff Williams to be the next CEO. And I don't know whether that's the like official plan, like whether Tim actually does intend to leave, in the next few years, or whether they just want to always have a backup, where in case something happens to Tim or in case he has to leave quickly, then they have somebody kind of groomed, ready to go, like to the public. They have a clear plan. Like if Tim Cook decided he wanted to run for president or something, he could just quit and Jeff Williams would take over now, and it wouldn't be that big of a disruption, it seems, like to the public. Like, we don't know how it works internally. To the public, it kind of seems like. Anyway, I don't think the way Jony left was a surprise at all. I don't think the timing was that much of a surprise. And ultimately, going back to the industrial design side of this, I actually don't think this is going to be that big of a change, because it does seem, Tim's email can say things about how collaborative they are and everything else, but the reality is there's a lot of smoke behind the fire that he really wasn't that involved recently, and that he really wasn't, very hands-on in the last few years, even in the actual products. I don't think he had zero design or zero influence. I think he had some, but it certainly does seem like most of the design of Apple's products over the last few years has been coming out of the people who are still there now, not Jony Ive personally himself. They have a design team, and actually, and Evans Hankey, apparently, I've never heard of her before this. It doesn't seem like she had any kind of public profile before this, but in the wake of this news, we've heard rumblings here and there and stories here and there. She seems very well respected, and she seems like she's been running stuff there for a while in industrial design. Like, it seems like she's basically been running the team effectively for a while now. So this is more like making formal what was already basically happening. And so I'm guessing most of the change of like what's going to happen when Jony Ive leaves Apple, I bet most of that change has already happened. I bet we're already seeing what's going to happen when Jony Ive has left Apple. It wouldn't surprise me if much of the recent design coming out of Apple had little to no Jony involvement. Like, how much of the new Mac Pro do you think he designed? Because we know that was designed entirely like in the last 2 years. How much of that do you think he designed? I'm guessing nearly zero. Do you think he designed the newest iPad Pro that had a radically different shape than the previous ones? Maybe he had some involvement, but probably not heavy involvement. Like the more recent designs. Like, do you think he designed much of the iPhone 10? Maybe, but I bet a lot of the people who are still there now did a lot of that work. So I think we're already seeing post Jony Apple. We've been seeing it now for years, and it's fine, because ultimately the design team is a big. It's not a big team, but it's a team of multiple people, not just the guy, like the one guy whose name we knew, who we heard in videos and White Worlds. Like, it was always much deeper than that. And it seems like the people who have been doing most of the design and most of the operating of that team for the last few years are now just formally in charge. And before, they were kind of informally in charge. That's kind of how it seems. So I'm not worried at all about this transition. We should get to the whole like reporting to ops thing that Gruber brought up, but before we do, John, did I get most of this right so far?
I disagree with some of your assessments, but it's hard to. I mean, it's just a gut feeling because neither one of us actually knows. Like, we're not there talking to the design team, but it's this age-old problem we talk about all the time. It's hard to tell what exactly is going on inside Apple. One thing, like the idea of him phasing out of the company again when he had the title change, it was so clear that like, all right, well, he's done a lot of things. I feel like he's accomplished what he wanted to accomplish in this realm, and probably wants to be less closely involved. And that would have been a nice smooth ramp over multiple years to him transitioning out, except that in the middle there, because these things are never like, you can never plan them out perfectly. Same thing with like Jeff Williams being a successor CEO. Like, he might leave and go run JCPenney. Like, weird things happen, Anyway, after he became CDO, there was a period where apparently Tim Cook or whoever convinced him to come back and take a more hands-on role, because apparently he pulled too far back and maybe the transition wasn't ready. So it was kind of a bumpy ride on his way out. It wasn't like, you'll just slowly fade away. It was like, I'm disengaging. I'm going to be the CDO. And then it's like, well, we need a little bit more from you. Okay, well, I'll come back. But no, actually, I'm out. Right? So these things never quite go as smoothly as you would want them to. And as for what he'll do next, sure, he likes to do those weird Christmas tree things and the super expensive stuff for rich people. And weird. So certainly he'll end up doing weird things, like weird from the perspective of the guy who makes iPhones, right? Because, he's done a lot of consumer electronics. I don't expect him to do immediately more consumer electronics. I expect him to do like a spatula or God knows, you know what I mean? But for everything I know about him, I don't think I mean, maybe, what do I know about him? I read a book on him. I've seen him in lots of videos. That's what I know. Anyway, based on that, I'm not sure he would be satisfied just doing weird designery stuff for rich people, because there is a kind of populist, silversmith's son, man of the people angle where he wants to make things that people actually use. Like, granted, you got a weird Christmas tree, but like, I think he would be equally excited about a really good pen that costs, $1.50. Can you make a good pen for $1.50? Like, or like a spatula or whatever? Like,
no, you can't.
Prosaic. No, I think, anyway, but like, I think that inevitably, if he continues to work at all, which is not a given, because like you said, he doesn't need to work anymore, right? I think one of the things he may end up doing is more prosaic design that has a chance of being used by people other than his, 0.001% rich friends. Because obviously going from a company where you make something that literally billions of people use, you're going to step back and make something that 5 rich people use, right? But inevitably, if he keeps doing that, it's going to be like, you know what? I'm kind of sick of making, extremely expensive baubles that look really cool. I'd rather make something that I think some people will actually use and appreciate in its use. Like, he's not becoming an artist or a sculptor. Like, he wants to be a designer. And I really believe he is bought into the idea that design is about being functional for the intended purpose and all that stuff. So who knows? If he continues to work at all in the long term, I expect him to make boring things occasionally. Will we know that he made them? I suppose so. I don't even know how this works in the world of high-profile design, right? Like, will he put his name on them? They probably won't be in Target. You're right about that, right? But who knows? Like, weirder things have happened. And when you have somebody like him who doesn't have anything to prove, first of all, his resume is set. Like, he never needs to do anything else significant in his life ever again, and he's fine, right? Doesn't need money. When someone is in that scenario, they can end up doing weird things. So if he wakes up one day and says, you know what, I want to make that spatula for Target, by God, he's going to make that spatula for Target because no one can tell him not to. And, it's not going to diminish anything that he's done. Like, there's no thing that he can design that will diminish his past accomplishments. So I'm ready for weird stuff, but I'm also ready for him to just, he's never been the most public person, and I expect to see him not be grabbing the spotlight at every opportunity. That's just the MO for anyone important who leaves Apple. Like, if you look at all the people, even they leave on bad terms, like Forstall, he didn't like run out and be like, I'm going to be on every cable news channel bad-mouthing Apple every time someone wants a comment for the next 5 years. That is not how things work, even when you essentially get fired and leave on bad terms. So I really don't expect Jony Ive to be appearing on every cable news show every time they need someone to talk about design.
I don't know. What was it? Tony Fadell, who seemed to be very forthcoming with the bad-mouthing of Apple once he left. Is that who I'm thinking of?
Yeah, he definitely does that. But even he had a quiet period immediately after he left. And, whether it's because people aren't interested in hearing what he has to say or he got involved in other things, it's just like, it's not the usual MO for the big executives. And, again, Tony Fadell is not leaving on the same terms as Jony Ive, like going out a hero to the company or whatever. So, yeah. What I'm most interested in on this topic, before we get to the new folks at Apple, is taking a bit of time now, because if not now, then when, to look back at Jony Ive's work at Apple. Like, what did he mean to the company? What did he mean to the products? The Jony Ive era, as it spans all of his career, where he was a publicly known person, more or less, and all the products we know about. I think it's worth looking back at that, and I think it also, at least my view of looking back on it, also influences how I think the company will go forward without him, because it's sort of like, well, when he was there, what did he do? And now that he's not there, what will not be done or be done differently? And I want to start with what I think is an easy one, but I think it's worth saying explicitly, especially on this program, which is, do we think that Jony Ive's time at Apple has been a net positive for the company?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, is that a legitimate question?
Yeah, and I just, yes, the correct answer is yes. I just want to put that out there. And the reason I want to say that is because if you listen to this show, especially if you only listen recently, the only time you ever hear us invoke the name Jony Ive is when we're complaining that, like, the laptops are too thin, or they don't have enough ports, or the keyboard is bad, and like it's his. I said before, his name is used as an expletive, to, like, as the singular personification of all of the design we don't like at Apple, because he was in charge of all design at Apple, and therefore, if there's some part of design at Apple that you don't like, you get to use that name as your little hook to explain who you're talking about. But let's be clear, second only to Steve Jobs, I feel like. He has, the two of them combined, which I think is worth discussing. That team have done like the biggest turnaround in U.S. corporate history. Added tremendous value to the company. Made not one, not two, but 3, 4, 5, depending on how you count them, insanely popular, good products that sold really well, that were beloved, that did things that broke new ground, that defined entire product segments and industries. If you take any one of those things, the iMac, the iPhone, the iPod, the iPad, I would say even the Apple Watch, any of those things, pick any single one, and any designer would kill to if it had been remotely involved with a single one of those. And to be the head of design, or personally responsible for major aspects of the design before he was elevated to that level, for a single one of those is just, an accomplishment of a lifetime. And he has this ridiculous resume. And during that time, Apple went from a company that was basically going out of business, because remember, he was there before Steve came back, right? He was at Apple. It was at the Apple that was going down the tubes, toiling away behind the scenes, making things that no one actually let him ship until Jobs came and said, look at all this great stuff. We should let this guy ship some of this stuff. I think it'll be cool. And then, we got the iMac and all the other stuff. So yes, Jony Ive, probably the best product designer that has ever existed, as measured by anything that you could objectively measure. Like, you could, have opinions about what product you think is better or more elegant or whatever, but as measured by beloved by the most people, sold the most number, made the most money, turned around the company that he worked at, was the most positive influence of the company that he worked at. He is head and shoulders above anybody else, just because of the scale of things. We talk about this all the time, but like, great designers of the past who made things that are iconic, the designers of the Volkswagen Beetle, like, so rarely has there been a singular name associated with it, and so rarely have there been a series of them that have, within the same company, that have pulled that company from the brink of bankruptcy to the biggest company in the world. Like, it's a story that hasn't existed before, and Apple is so large that if you actually compare any of the numbers against anything that you can think of, except maybe the wheel, like, the iPhone is the biggest, best-selling, most influential, like, product ever made, especially when you consider that every phone on the market is now essentially an iPhone, like, in terms of its influence on the world of products. And I'm not sure if he was involved in any of the laptops, but this is the old man segment of the show. Apple basically defined what the modern laptop is too, when they decided to make a laptop where the keyboard is shoved up against a screen and below it is a pointing device, which started as a trackball and eventually became a trackpad. That's what every laptop looks like now still. Before Apple made the PowerBook line, that is not what laptops look like at all. So in the same way that before Apple made the phone, phones did not look like the iPhone, and then after Apple made the iPhone, now all phones look like that. Like, I don't know if that was if Jony Ive even worked at the company at that point, but yeah, and of course the Mac with the GUI. Apple's done that a couple of times, but Jony Ive's been involved with a lot of them, and especially all the most recent ones. So all that is a long-winded way to say that, regardless of what we may think about his particular tastes versus our particular tastes as they relate to the details of an individual products, I'm not going to say we're nitpicking, because it's not just nits, they are fundamental differences, but you can't argue with the results. Like, there is no arguing with his work as a designer. He is one of the greatest designers to ever live, probably the greatest designer we'll ever see in our entire lifetime. Doesn't mean that he's always right. Doesn't mean that everything he did is perfect and without flaw and without argument. Doesn't even mean his design philosophy has not evolved over the course of that. But you can't argue with the numbers.
So I am not a avid designer by any means, and I feel like as I get older and older, I appreciate design more and more, but I don't really know what I'm talking about when it comes to design. But I feel like I know enough to know that Dieter Rams is frequently cited as one of the best designers, if not the best designer who has ever lived. I don't know the answer to this question because I'm not familiar enough with Rams's work, but if you, John, I'm hoping you're at least slightly familiar with it. If you had to pick between him and Ive, would you still pick Ive?
Yeah, based on objective measures, for sure. Because, yes, he did. It was very influential, and he made some beautiful, elegant products. But did he take the companies that he worked for, or his design studio, to the levels that Ive took Apple? Are his products in the hands of as many people as Ive's products have been? Are his products as beloved by as many people as Jony's? It's just scale, right? And I feel like you can you can judge on artistic merit and say, well, this one designer who made this one thing that 5 people have ever seen is really the best, But I'm saying, like, all right, that's like judging your art, judging on the level of art or whatever. But as a practical concern, and if your goal is to make great things that are useful and beloved by people, the sheer scale of Apple, and that's the only thing you can objectively measure. Everything else is just opinion. But if you say fact based, are you a successful product designer? How do you measure the success of a product? And I feel like the way you'd measure the success is, that everybody likes it, that the company you work for as a designer is successful because of your designs, and the products are successful at what they're intended to do. And, I feel like Dieter Rams, his scale is 1 bazillionth the size of Jony Ive's scale.
That's fair.
So the other aspect of this, so now we've talked about his legacy, and I've said all these nice things, because now I want to bring the more difficult question, which is, all right, so getting back to the idea that Jony Ive is, not designing these things personally, right? This is, and also the concept that we can't actually know what goes on inside Apple. We're just looking in from the outside. Those two things combined gets back to my rule that I always invoke whenever talking about Apple, which is that in the end, it doesn't matter who specifically decides that the laptop should be this thin or shouldn't have an SD card slot, or, the keyboard, they should stick to the butterfly keyboard, or any particular design concern you might have. And, frequently attributed to that darn Jony Ive, he wants the things to be featureless with no buttons on them. We have no idea if that's not like a faction inside his design studio. And in fact, Jony Ive wanted to add tons more buttons, but was deferring to his design. We just don't know. But here's what we do know. Like, we can never know those internals until they write their tell-all books. But here's what we do know. He was in charge of design. And despite all the collaborative type of things where like, oh, we discussed it all together, whatever, the buck stops with the people who are in charge. So the bottom line is, if there's something that you don't like about Apple design during the time when Jony Ive was the head of design, it's on Jony Ive whether it was his decision, whether it was his design or not. And certainly it wasn't his design. But he was the person who made the decisions. He was the one who gave the thumbs up or thumbs down. And ultimately, what is produced design-wise by the company is his responsibility. That's what it means to be a leader, right? The buck stops with him. Even if he had nothing to do with it, even if he was against the idea but went along with it, like, that's the job of being the leader. It's not to design all the things. It's to have a position and a vision and make decisions that can't, the people below you can have positions and argue for them or whatever. But in the end, like, it's a hierarchy. And I feel like, especially with the absence of Jobs, that Tim Cook was highly unlikely to override Jony Ive's design decisions. So if there is something you don't like, if you think the laptop should have an SD card slot, right? If you don't like getting rid of Touch ID to have the swipey home button, if you don't like something about the Apple Watch, no matter what it is, I feel is entirely comfortable to not blame Jony Ive personally, but to say that is part of his legacy. Because during the time that he was in charge of design, Apple did certain things. And every single thing Apple did, I'm totally comfortable saying that's at his feet. Because he could have stopped that from happening. He could have made a different thing happen, right? So despite the fact that we know he's not doing anything personally, and despite the fact that we can't know what goes on inside there, I will continue to think about the legacy of Jony Ive in terms of what the company produced when he was in charge. not in terms of what he did personally, not in terms of, his specific opinions, but like that's your legacy when you're at that level of an executive. Like, were we to get Jony Ive on the program, I'm sure we could ask him lots of questions about his opinions about design. But ultimately, you can also ask him, say, during your tenure at Design at Apple, here are some things that Apple did. Looking back on those, are there things that the company did during your tenure that you regret, that you are particularly proud of, that you wish could have been more like this and less like that? Like you can, as a leader, you can have opinions on your legacy in that way without it being personal, because you're like, well, I didn't design the iPhone 5 personally and draw every line of it. I saw 7 competing designs and picked one of them and herded it and refined it or gave a vision statement or whatever. But in the end, Apple ships a thing, and that's a thing that you said, yes, we're going to ship. So that, I feel like, is the most important lens through which outsiders can judge Jony Ive, not so much as a designer, but as a leader of designers, as a leader of the design wing of the company best known for design. And so that's why I will continue to invoke his name, despite the fact that we all know that he's not drawing every single design. And he's, half the time he may be deferring to strongly held opinions by his collaborative group, but in the end, it's his responsibility.
Well, the thing with that's very interesting to me is, as I'm thinking about the things that the three of us love to complain about, things like the keyboard, things like the Apple TV remote, things like the touch bar, as I sit back and think about all of these things, I can't think of anything other than the keyboards that I really and truly believe is unequivocally bad. I will even go to bat for the Apple TV remote. I know I'm the only one on the planet that will. It has problems. I'm not denying that, but I don't think it's objectively bad. The touch bar, to me, is not objectively bad. It may not be for the three of us, but I don't think it's objectively bad. So many of the laptops and computers of recently, I don't think that they're objectively bad. Like, I want an SD card slot, but I don't think it is objectively wrong that it's not a part of Apple laptops anymore. And I'm trying to think, is there anything, and I know you're going to light me up about the Apple TV remote, but is there anything other than the keyboards that we can say, no matter who you are or what you're doing with this device, this is actually bad or wrong or what have you? Is there anything?
Yeah, the remote definitely qualifies, and here's why. It's like you can have opinions about what features a product might have. Oh, I wanted to have this port, I wanted to have this battery life, or whatever. But every product has a job to do. The job of the remote is to let you control what happens on a television while you're sitting on the couch, and you can measure how well the Apple TV remote does that job. And you can, bad, what does bad mean? You'd measure it against other remote controls, and you'd have to come up with some criteria. What criteria do we care about? You pick anything. You're the person who's going to say, I'm going to judge remotes against each other, and I'm going to have a bunch of tests to see if they fulfill the purpose. Almost anything that you can think of, the Apple TV remote does worse than the best remotes, for sure, which I feel like is the bar that Apple should be judged against. Like, is it worse than like the worst cable box remote? Maybe not, right? Maybe it comes out, as a wash and that thing, but against a good remote, the Apple TV remote gets destroyed. And that's, you can have lots of opinions about features and sort of the product design, but I feel like the job to be done, in the parlance of all the economic whiz kids, it's supposed to let you control your television. And it does that, but it does that very, very badly in almost all aspects. That's a great example of a thing that I put at the feet of Jony Ive, whether he had anything to do with that remote or not. The bottom line is he was in charge and they shipped that. Now, all that said, back when Jobs was there, it was clear to everybody involved that Jony Ive got to have a say. But in the end, if Steve decided something needed to be like stitched leather, it was going to be stitched leather. Like, it doesn't really matter what Jony Ive or anybody else thought, right? So when he was there, that's why I'm totally comfortable putting it at the feet of Steve Jobs, everything. And it's weird, like I said before, well, then Jobs goes and you don't put this all at the feet of Tim Cook. Yes, kind of ultimately, but my read on the dynamic inside the company is that, again, Tim Cook, unless there is some large economic concern, and even if there is one, like with the gold watch, it seems to me that Tim Cook is not inclined to override Jony Ive when it comes to design or anything like that. Override him maybe when it comes to pricing and maybe when it comes to what we should make and what we shouldn't. Like Jony Ive had to pitch Tim Cook reportedly to say we should make a watch. Ultimately, Tim Cook said, sure, fine, go ahead. Again, perhaps another, thing to get Jony to stick around, right? But I don't think Tim is the design decider in chief, despite the fact that rank-wise, he could decide that. Especially if Tim ever did that, Jony would have left long ago, because I don't think he would stay at a company where that happens. Would he stay at a company where Steve Jobs overrides him? Yeah, sure. But that's probably the only person on the planet that Jony Ive would allow that to happen from at the point that he's grown to the level that he is. So yeah, there are definitely, I think, objectively bad designs as measured by anything that you could objectively measure about the job that thing is supposed to do. Are they the worst? No, but it's like average or like somewhere below good, and we want Apple's to be the best. And the remote is so galling because it's obvious to almost anybody what the problems with the thing are. Like, it's not like it's not some nuance or subtlety that you have to really understand the essence of a remote. It's like, no, just it's hard to use. You make mistakes all the time. The thing gets lost. It's not comfortable to hold. Like, it's just, I don't want to talk about the remote, but that's an easy one. Touch bar, you could argue that accidental input is more of a problem than they think, but and then of course, obviously the keyboard, the reason why you gave that as a gimme, it's like its job is to type letters, and if it doesn't do that right, sometimes it doesn't make any letters and sometimes make double, that's no good. And you say, well, it still gets the job done, it's just a little bit tricky how you got to do a backspace bar. Like, yeah, but we're judging it against like average competence, and it is below the average competence, therefore we say it's bad.
We are sponsored this week by Casper, who makes awesome mattresses designed by humans for humans. Casper's mattresses are cleverly designed to mimic human curves, providing supportive comfort for all kinds of bodies. They have the original Casper mattress with multiple supportive memory foams for a quality sleep surface with just the right amounts of both sink and bounce, and a breathable design to help you sleep cool throughout the night. And with over 20,000 reviews and an average of 4.8 stars across Casper, Amazon, and Google, Casper is becoming the internet's favorite mattress. And now they offer 4 other mattresses as well. They have the Wave. This is a patent-pending premium support system to mirror the natural shape of your body. This is the one I use, and I gotta say, I absolutely love it. I really love my Casper Wave, and I really miss it when I'm traveling. It's that good. They also have the Essential, a streamlined design at a price that won't keep you up at night, and the new Hybrid Casper and Hybrid Wave. These combine the pressure relief of the award-winning foam with durable yet gentle springs. And Casper also has a wide array of other products like pillows and sheets to get an overall better sleep experience. All of these are designed, developed, and assembled in the U.S. And they're brought to you at affordable prices because Casper cuts out middle people and sells directly to you. They offer free shipping and free returns in the US and Canada. The returns are totally hassle-free if you're not completely satisfied. The shipping is delivered to your door in a small box. You can get it upstairs. It's super easy to buy and use Casper's, and you can return it if you aren't satisfied. You can be sure of your purchase with Casper's 100-night risk-free sleep-on-it trial. So get $50 towards select mattresses by visiting casper.com/ATP and using code ATP2019 at checkout. That's casper.com/ATP with code ATP2019. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much to Casper for sponsoring our show. The dynamic that you said a minute ago about Tim wouldn't really want to override Jony on much because that was probably a very expensive fight to pick. I think the dynamic between what happens when Steve died and then there's a new CEO who's not a product person at all, and then there's this designer that everyone loves, much the same way they loved Steve, who is still there, it created this weird dynamic where it seemed in some ways that Jony was more powerful than Tim, or at least there were lines drawn that Tim probably didn't want to cross certain lines because it would cause friction with Jony or override Jony in ways that Tim thought that he should be empowered or things like that. And so what ended up happening when Steve left, Jony got elevated to not like a dictatorship, but to a position of extreme power, more power than he had before, with very little editing going on. And look, many of the world's greatest creatives really benefit from some editing, and Jony was that way too, But because of the the politics and the stature of the higher ups, because of like how that all worked out over the last few years, after Steve died and everything. Jony had seemingly a lot more power and influence than he probably should have had. And for various political reasons, with the public especially, and maybe with markets and whatever else, Tim basically turned Jony into the new Steve in like a power sense. He moved software design under Jony. He moved, he seemed to let design dictate a lot more about the products than before. And so like when Gruber initially wrote the take, last week about like worrying that Jony wasn't replaced because the new heads of design report directly to Jeff Williams, I don't see that as a problem, because I see the current situation, like up till now, as being a weird hierarchy where basically design has been in charge of all products. Like the head of products, we wondered like for the last few years, like who at Apple is the head of products really? It was Steve before. Tim never had that job and didn't seem to want that job or have the ability to do it. He seemed to delegate it, but it seemed like he delegated it mostly to Jony. So effectively, the head of products at Apple, if you had to pick someone who it was, it seemed to be Jony for the last, X years. And so now, and I'm so mad that Gruber wrote this article today, because I've been waiting for the last few days to come on this podcast.
That's what happens when it happens the wrong day for our show.
Yeah, like I've been waiting to come on this podcast and say exactly what Gruber wrote in his article today. Mm-hmm. So basically, for the last few years, Jeff Williams seemingly has been being slowly elevated into the role where now the answer, the question of who is the head of product design at Apple, the answer now seems to be Jeff Williams. And I have a lot of thoughts about that, most of it is a little trepidation, because we don't really know what Jeff Williams is like as a product, as the head of product, except that we can see the Apple Watch, right? It seems like he has effectively always been the head of product for the Apple Watch, so we have that example seemingly, but we don't know much about Jeff Williams. He doesn't have much personality displayed to the public. And so it's hard to really get a read on him from our side of things. But it does seem like now Jeff Williams is the head of product, whatever. Tim is like the administrator above all of this. And Tim can probably set the direction of large initiatives like privacy, but or services, that kind of stuff. But it doesn't seem like Tim has any interest in product details, and that's fine.
Well, he decides whether or not they're going to make a watch, for example.
Yeah,
right?
Sure, exactly.
That's his call.
Yeah, that's probably right. But it seems like before, the head of products was somebody who kind of was on his own. Jony Ive was kind of on his own, kind of politically more powerful than Tim, maybe, or at least closer to equals, which probably made that relationship a little bit awkward or a little bit hard to edit or administer. And also, if Jony did indeed have this role of being the kind of de facto head of products, and even if not, in his role as the head of design, it's kind of weird to have a head of design who's barely there, or who is working out of his house in San Francisco when the rest of the company's an hour away, working in an office every day. And Jony, even if only a little bit of that is true, that's still when you have a manager who is very powerful, very respected, very opinionated, but is not always there, that makes it hard to make decisions. Or when you have that manager who is busy, designing the building and the desks and stuff. It's, for the last few years, they've had kind of a half absentee, highly distracted, highly burnt out head of design. Now they have moved the design organizationally back where it belongs in the ranks. Now they have two people who are clearly officially in charge. You have Evans Hankey as industrial design head. You have Alan Dye as VP of human interface design, which I think he is horrible. Oh God, I really don't like that he is the head of this, but he has been, since iOS 7. So this is not new. Oh my God, I don't like Alan Dye's direction. But that's for another day. But like now you have two clear heads of design, hardware and software, and they both report to the COO, who is basically the head of product right now. That seems like an actual functioning, healthy organization. And I don't think you need design to be CEO level. You don't need like the chief design officer. Like you don't need that if you have a functioning hierarchy where there is a head of product who is very empowered to do things, and whether it's the CEO or not. It should be. I think in Apple it should be somebody very close to the CEO. Like I think it only works here. Like with Jeff Williams being that, that's probably only going to work because Tim is very happy to delegate that to him. But you have design reporting to the head of product. That is the way it was under Steve. Steve was the head of product, design reported to him. So I think this now makes a lot more sense than the kind of weird, vague, minefield of how things were before. And because now we have actual full-time employees on site serving in these roles, I think things are going to be a lot more clear. And it's probably going to function better. So I think even though I don't know anything about these people really, the few things I've heard about Evans Hankey have been very good. I have high hopes that I think this is like cleaning up something that was kind of messy, putting it in a way, in a structure that is more likely to produce good, consistent results.
So that mess it's part of any group of people doing anything, but certainly part of corporate America or large companies. Like to think of it as, they make products and we talk about their products and we judge the various political maneuverings and the org chart and their financials. But in the end, this is just people. They're all just people. And people problems are always the biggest problems of any corporation, which is why staffing, HR, all those sort of soft skills, they call them or whatever, like that's the whole ball game, right? So in a situation like how did Apple find itself in this situation? They were so successful and they have these successful products and they have this team making them. And eventually that success, your success as a company leads to the elevation of individual people within the company to the point where, you mentioned before that Jony Ive had been elevated, but then, you later clarified, it's not like he had been elevated in the passive voice. Tim Cook elevated him. Tim Cook elevated him for several good reasons. One, he was your meal ticket. He made Apple what it is today, right? Two, there's a public perception, which was probably the truth, that he is Apple's meal ticket. And if there's a fight between Forstall and Jony Ive, and you pick Ive, that's probably the right call. Like as far as the stock market is concerned, certainly, but probably as far as you're concerned in terms of like what is fair, who has meant more to the company, who is more important to keep, right? And so, and these kind of decisions, you think of them academically, but in the end, those are actual people. So if you get to the point where you're in a situation where you are convinced and everyone around you is convinced, and it may actually even be the right thing to be convinced, that is really important for you to keep Jony Ive happy and he wants to be in San Francisco and be less engaged from the company, you start doing things that if you had pulled back a little bit, you'd be like, is this actually the best for the company and the products? Or at a certain point, am I, pig-headedly pursuing a goal that involves keeping a human happy when really, like, that's great and it is good to keep Jony around, but I feel like the company probably passed the point where they should have let him go. Like, if he wasn't engaged anymore, like the goal of the company is not keep Jony Ive employed and happy. Like the company doesn't exist to serve Jony Ive. Jony Ive exists to serve the company, right? I don't know if from the inside it ever looked like that. From the outside, I feel like that may be the case. And, again, trying to read the tea leaves and say, well, he's responsible for everything they ship. If there's something that characterizes, the time after he was elevated to the head of everything, I feel like when it came time to make a product better, the philosophy embodied by the product and the execution by the design team was to attack it as designers and do things to it that had mixed success in the market, let's say. And I'm contrasting this with, and you go back to what Marco was saying earlier in the show about, like, we already kind of know what post Jony Ive looks like this. I'm contrasting this to the product design philosophy as embodied by things like the Mac Pro and the iMac Pro and like the Pro workflow team, like the idea of addressing that market and figuring out what their needs are and doing something that generally designed under both Steve and Jony didn't do, which is like, let's ask the customers what they want, which is the antithesis of Apple design. If you ask them what they want, they say a faster horse. Like, it's the whole, if you ask people what they want, you don't get the iPhone, right? You don't get the iMac or the iPod. You don't, like, that's not how great design works. But you can take the other approach too far, especially if you have a singular person with a tremendous amount of power who the entire company thinks is very important to keep happy. You can end up with designs like the Apple TV remote and, things like the touch bar, or whatever, like whatever your pet peeve is, or the very thin keyboard that ends up not being reliable, right? Whatever you want to assign the blame for that, it's clear that, like, the fault in those things wasn't that Apple was asking for too much customer feedback and just making what customers wanted. Like, there's a spectrum, right? If you go too far and you just make what customers want, you will never make an innovative product. You will never make a hit, and you will end up making like mainframes, right? On the other hand, if you just do what one very powerful person wants to do at their whim, despite, ignoring what the customers want, you might end up with products that are less successful than they could be, let's say. And I feel like towards the end of Jony Ive's tenure, that's how things were going. And I feel like the whole Pro workflow team is like, if Jony Ive wanted to have something like that, he would have had that long ago. It came recently, right? It was a change in direction for the company. It has demonstrably changed the kind of products Apple produces and the way they produce them.
And I would argue for the better.
For the better as far as we're concerned, but certainly it has changed them, right? And we were seeing the fruits of that change. We like it better. Some people else might like it worse, but I feel like, again, what we can measure objectively, how well loved are the new laptops compared to the history of all the laptops that Apple has ever made. I would argue that these are not particularly well loved in the pantheon of Apple laptops for a variety of reasons, right? And so you can like them or not like them, but you can judge them against history, and you can look at why they may be less well loved versus, for example, how well loved was the iMac Pro in the pantheon of all-in-one computers from Apple. Pretty well loved by the people who that product is aimed at, as far as I can tell. Like, it's an all-in-one computer. Apple has made a lot of them. Some of them have been more loved than others. Everybody freaking loves the iMac Pro, like, for the people who are in that market, right? So there are ways to measure the success, and I feel like the pesky human issues of the individual person who has, they're all their own feelings and emotions and accomplishments and ego and, just opinions and the amount of power they're given, like that all, it's not a toxic hell stew, Tim, but it is quite a stew. And even the best companies in the end can be reduced to the decisions of a small number of people, and those people problems can result in less than optimal situations. And, I'm not going to say they should have got rid of him sooner, or he should have been allowed to leave sooner, or whatever. Like, there's lots of different ways this could have gone. Obviously, the Pro workflow team and everything happened while Jony was ostensibly still there, so it's not like he was opposed to it or left because of its existence or felt like it was undercutting him. But, like, and I totally believe in all the, all the press releases about how they're collaborative and blah. I believe that's true. Like, they are collaborative. They do bounce ideas of each other. I bet even Tim is involved with in some capacity, right? But there is a hierarchy of where the decisions get made, right? The hierarchy is clear. The fact that they're collaborative at the highest levels is the strength of the company. The fact that ideas can come from anywhere, that Phil Schiller, the marketing guy, can come up with the click wheel on the iPod, for example, and they don't just dismiss the idea because he's just the marketing guy, right? I believe all of that it is collaborative and it is true. But there are also lines of hierarchy, and that's how they resolve the collaboration. It's not design by committee. It is collaborative design within the design group, in the leadership team of Apple, all the way down to the rank and file levels. Like, that's how great things get made, but you do need those decision points. And in the end, Jony Ive, I feel like, was elevated to the point where where his power and his engagement combined to allow some of his, I'm not going to say his worst instincts, but some of his instincts that were less optimal to Apple's product success than they had been, either when his opinions were different or when his opinions were, I'm not going to say moderated by or edited by, I'm going to say combined with a collaborator like Steve Jobs, right? Or even Forstall or whoever, like whatever, if you want to be an antagonistic collaboration, or like this came up in a couple of our Slack channels, or maybe it was also in someone's article. The comparison a lot of people drew between Ive and Jobs was John Lennon and Paul McCartney, which also at times was antagonistic, but also very fruitful collaboration of two very different people. One was not editing the other, or rather they were both editing at each other, but that the collaboration produced more than the individuals could have done. And I feel like that's why Apple collaborates at the highest level. And that collaboration comes down to individuals, right? So how will Alan Dye, Evan Sankey, and Jeff Williams collaborate together in the absence of Jony? How will the Pro Workflow team be factored into that? Who runs the Pro Workflow team? Who decides that it's a thing that they should do or continue doing? How will Tim Cook collaborate with them differently than he collaborated with Jony Ive? Presumably, Tim Cook is less concerned about keeping Evan Sankey happy than he was about keeping Jony Ive happy. Concerned, like he wants everyone to be happy, but the power dynamic between Evan Sankey and Tim Cook is different than it was between Jony Ive, inventor of name a bazillion products. That, you know, like the dynamics, the people are different, the arrangement of people are different in the corporate hierarchy, and the interpersonal dynamics are different. We're hoping that the new dynamic will produce, you know, products that are more successful, that we like better, whatever, pick your criteria, right? But honestly, we don't entirely know. We know a little bit if we assume that Jony Ive has been checked out for a long time, but in the end, he was there. And if there was something that he vehemently didn't like, he could have given it a thumbs down, which is why we have all those stories about, oh, you know, the team had to go out to San Francisco and wait around for Jony to come. And in the end, he didn't even give us the decision we wanted. Why did they need his decision? Because he was in charge of design, and they had, like, we have option A and option B, and we have opinions in both directions. We need you to pick one because that's your job as the leader. We bring you what we think are the best options, and we have factions internally, but none of us can decide because you're the boss. And they were disappointed that no decision was made, which happens all the time. And it's not like slamming him for not making the decision. Sometimes you just need to think about it some more or whatever. But again, getting back to what I said before, in the end, everything that goes out the door when he's in charge is on him, whether it was his idea or whether he even, you know, maybe he just punted and they just went with whatever they, you know, we don't know the dynamics, but we know it's his responsibility. Anyway, that's how I feel about the tail end of Jony Ive's tenure at Apple. That it's could have gone better, is what I'm going to say.
I think that's fair. But you said a moment ago, you know, pick any one of the gazillions of products that Ive has done, you know, to cite as an example. But from what I understand, Evan Sankey has done a ton of products at Apple and has like hundreds of patents with her name on them or something like that. And so I was digging into, you know, who are Evans and Alan, and I came across an article, which of course I didn't save the link for, so now I'm going to have to dig it back up, but that's okay. I came across an article.
Professional podcasters.
Yeah, there we go. Wherein they discussed, you know, who these people are, and they cited a tweet from Meili Ko, I hope I pronounced that right, who I saw speak at Layers several years ago and is tremendous. And Meili wrote on Twitter, this is with regard to Evans, and she's been making shit run right for a long-ass time, undercredited, excuse me, in my personal opinion. So this is from someone who worked at Apple Design. In fact, on Meili's own website, she writes, in 2014, I left a long stint at Apple where I designed and prototyped new things to poke at with the human interface design device prototyping team. My work included blah, 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 fundamental UI concepts for Apple's Force Touch and Taptic Engine, and my explorations helped justify and refine the development of the iPad Mini, iPad Pro, and Apple Pencil. So Meili is someone who I would think knows what the crap she's talking about, and she says that Evans is very undercredited. So that is kind of a big deal, and certainly it sounds like Evans has been running the design studio for a long time and is effectively has been the head of design for a long time as well, from what I can tell.
Well, everybody in the design group is undercredited. Like, that's the whole point of having a figurehead. Jony Ive is the figurehead, and then literally everyone else is undercredited. He is overcredited, and everybody else, because of the conservation of credit, is undercredited. Like, that's just how it works. Like, I remember it used to be like Apple didn't even want you to know who worked for them in this secret room. They didn't even want you to know those people's names, let alone their faces, because they're afraid of people getting poached, and they would brag about how there was no turnover. Right? Yeah, of course, the actual work is done by the employees, and the boss is just in charge and gets to take all the glory and credit, because everyone can't be a figurehead. So I'm not slighting the work of the people who are actually doing the design, but there is a design direction, and there is a head of design, and that head of design makes decisions. And again, in the end, we have to just judge the products that are put out. No matter whose idea it was Johnny's, in the latter years, Johnny's decision to put it out. So that's another question, right? So all these designers who are there doing their design, design is having lots of ideas. Like, if you read any of the books about the things the design team does, like when they were making the original iPhone, one of the original ideas they had was basically the iPhone 4. Look kind of like an ice cream sandwich. Like we all know what the iPhone 4 looks like. Like, that was one of the designs in the running for the original iPhone. They didn't pick that one. They picked the design that we saw as the original iPhone. But eventually, many years later, they did the iPhone 4, right? And, these designers all have lots of ideas about what a product could be like, right? They also probably have ideas about the features that the product could have, and that shades into, the sort of, there's designing the thing to do the job, and there's deciding what the heck is the job, right? And that's all part of the same, part of the same stew when Jony Ive is the head of everything, right? But with some more divisions, I feel like, what will these designers do? What kind of ideas will they have when given direction from not just Evan Sankey, but also from, Jeff Williams, or maybe even from Alan Dye with a software idea, like that? When more people are combined, those same designers working in a different situation, maybe certain ideas that before wouldn't get past the, here are a bunch of options stage, could go farther. Or, it really depends on what opinions the new bosses have about the work that is produced. Because in the end, this group of designers don't just dictate exactly what it's going to be and get it right on the first try. You try all sorts of things, you have all sorts of ideas, and you discuss them. And that discussion with those particular people and those particular bosses, it decides what actually makes it out the door. And so certainly with this new set of people, but the exact same designers, we're going to see different products. Even if they wanted to, they couldn't make the same decisions as Johnny, because I'm sure Johnny, like every other person, is inscrutable, and who knows what he would have picked.
And I think that's actually a feature, not a bug. It seemed, especially up to about a few years ago, that Apple was kind of like running out of ideas of like how to move the products forward. And now, by having a change in design leadership, whether or not this was like kind of what was happening all along or not, this I think will give them permission to do things differently. It'll certainly give the designers permission to do things differently, because they won't have the fear of like what if Johnny overrides this, or like they'll be able to more explore new ideas without having to worry about like what would Johnny do. So there's part of that, but also just like I want to see what happens when Apple gets things shaken up a little bit, because when you're in a rut, and which it seems like it seemed for a while like the iPhone was in a rut before the iPhone 10. You had like the 6, 7, they were all kind of just 6S, like it was all kind of like, here's the most boring phone you've ever seen, and eventually like it got improved with the 10. The iPad was kind of in a lull for a while, and then the Pros that came out last fall with the new industrial design are really cool. The laptops I think have been in a rut for a little while, and I really can't wait to see what this fall's one ends up being, to see what direction that's taking. But I'm looking forward to having the influence of new designers able to flourish and able to get products out the door with just someone else being in charge and someone else being the filter at the top of that group. And this is why, to have Jeff Williams be seemingly the effective head of products, it seems a little weird to think about that, because we haven't really thought about Jeff Williams that way up till recently, very recently. But he's somebody new, and if to this role seemingly, or at least new in scope of the role. I want to see what that brings. That's kind of exciting to me. It's kind of like, and it isn't all going to be perfect. Not everything they do is ever perfect. But it's new. It's different. It's change. It's moving things forward. It's getting new blood in there. Into existing roles. I want to see what that brings. And I'm kind of excited about that. And I know I'm not going to like everything, and that's fine. We wouldn't have a podcast if I liked everything. but I'm very excited to just see it's just like something being shaken up and seeing some new blood, and seeing some people who've been apparently working for a very long time being elevated into new power. I want to see what that brings.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I really feel like, I don't know if stagnant's the right word, but it's certainly, I feel like Apple has been, and again, I don't think cruising is the right word, but I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but it's just been kind of business as usual. And I really am excited at the thought of having this new blood really allowed to spread their wings and do what they want to do. And this is going to be a very exciting time to be an Apple fan, which is good because, in my opinion, Apple's been pretty dominant for the last several years. I mean, they're occasionally, if not often, the most valuable company in America, if not the world. So it'll be interesting and cool to watch this all go down and watch this kind of work itself out, just like you said. Yeah, I'm right there with you, Marco. I'm really excited about where things are going from here.
I wouldn't call it stagnation, but this is another thing that from the outside I tend to map onto Jony Ive because I assume that he is the one making these decisions. If you're doing any job, especially a creative job, but really any job for a very long period of time, in the beginning, when you're just getting started in whatever your career is, you're very excited to attain the skills that those skilled in the art have. Whatever the thing you're doing, if you're a baker, to make your first wedding cake, right, or whatever, just do the basics, do them with your own twist or flair, but become competent. And you can keep going along that ramp where then you start having your own style more and deciding what you like and what you don't like. But if you're doing this for a very long time and you're very successful, especially in creative endeavors, I think people have a tendency, both because as they age and get more experience, but also as they become more skilled, you're less excited by things that you've already done. And you whatever your philosophy is for your craft or your art, I'm not going to say you make more extreme versions of it, but you pursue your muse more thoroughly. So in the beginning, when you're making your wedding cake, you may be like, well, in general, cakes tend to be layered with big layers on the bottom and small layers on the top, like a kind of thing. And, and they're made of this kind of material. And this is about how big they are. And you're constrained by the orthodoxy a lot because you're just learning, right? In the middle, you're I'm making a wedding cake that's a single layer and it's a cylinder straight up and down, and it's the new design trend. And now I've defined what wedding cakes are going to look like for the next 20 years or whatever. They're not pyramid shaped. They're like skyscraper shaped or something. And by the way, they're pink or whatever. But whatever your muse is, I feel like you do end up pursuing it, trying to get it the root of it. If you've seen Jony Ive's videos in his White World over the course of the past decade or so, you see him talk about always trying to find the essential nature of the product, the essence of the product, to get rid of extraneous things like that. That, as expressed in those videos, his design philosophy is all about, it's not about ornamentation. It's about figuring out what is the essence of insert whatever the product is, whether it's a laptop or you would probably say a remote or a pencil or an iPad or a phone. What is the essential nature of this product? What parts of it that we think are integral to the product are actually superfluous? And can I get rid of those? Can I simplify the design? Can I use fewer parts? Can I remove ornamentation or extra things? And that he has under his design leadership, Apple has pursued that philosophy in its products to an ever more extreme degree, almost entirely across the board, with the only recently a slight change in direction with the Pro products. And it made me think of something I saw recently. This is a program on Netflix. It's like a sci-fi anthology series of little animated shorts. It reminds me of like Liquid Television, MTV back in the day. A particular episode called Zima Blue. The series is called Love, Death, and Robots. It's on Netflix. Every episode is standalone. Most of them are not that good. Some of them are kind of exploitive and extreme. But I would recommend that everybody take a look at Zima Blue. And it's a sci-fi story. It's animated, and it's a story of an artist. And this artist, I won't spoil the thing for you. You should watch it. It's like 15 minutes long. Like, they're all very short. Pursues his muse, his passion, his artistic intent to an extreme for an inexplicable reason. A more extreme than Jony Ive, because again, it's a sci-fi story. But I would encourage everybody to check out Zima Blue on Netflix to see, what could have become of Jony Ive if if his life turned out a little bit differently and he was in a sci-fi animated show. But anyway, getting back to the Apple, I feel like that's the natural arc of someone's career. And by putting people in, replacing him with people in other, the people we just discussed, who are at different points in their career. None of those people made the iMac, right? None of them made all of those products, or were responsible for design when those products were produced, or however you want to parse it. They're all at different parts in their careers. They all have their own personal design philosophies. Are they all subscribed 100% with the essentialism and all of the philosophy espoused by Jony in all of his videos? Maybe, maybe not. Like, I would imagine that the design group is filled with a diversity of opinion about what thing they should be pursuing in their products. I also think that the design group probably lacks some opinions that are important for Apple's products to be very good. Some of those opinions might be coming from the pro work group people. Like, some of them might be coming from the software side, right? When Jony was the head of everything and he was so closely tied to the design group, like, there are aspects of successful laptops that may not be represented at all anywhere in the design group. Not because Jony Ive expunged all contrary opinion, but just because it's a bunch of industrial designers and product designers, and they think differently than someone who is, a professional in some market that products are sold into, or a marketing person, or, there are other perspectives. And so having Apple's products now not only have a different decider in front of the design group, but have what has to be more influence from things outside the design group, I think that's the better way to make a well-rounded, successful, pleasing product than to have even, the diversity of opinion that may be present in the design group. You need more perspective than that, because in the end, products are more than just the things that people in the little walled-off design group think about. They're also things that have prices and names and features and customers and jobs to do. And those, I feel like, are not well represented by the design group, and hopefully that will change for the better now.
We were sponsored this week by Eero. Never think about Wi-Fi again. The single Wi-Fi router model just doesn't work for our increasingly high bandwidth world. It's simple physics. Like light waves, Wi-Fi waves don't go through walls very well. So imagine if you were having like a big light bulb in your living room trying to light your master bedroom. It doesn't really work. You need a distributed system. We now have so many devices, not only inside of our houses, but outside too. You got like video doorbells, security cameras and stuff. All these things rely on stable Wi-Fi. And offices have had these kind of systems for years, but at considerable work and expense. Eero gives you an enterprise-grade Wi-Fi system in your home in just a few minutes. Just download the Eero app on your iOS or Android devices, and it'll walk you through each step of the process. It is quick, easy, and painless. I gotta say, I use Eero myself whenever I'm in so this is what happened. I'm in a vacation rental, and the very first day I got here, I noticed the Wi-Fi just didn't reach the bedroom. And the bedroom is where I was putting my iMac Pro. I ordered myself overnight an Eero package, the base unit and the 2 beacons, because I knew that A, I needed to get a better system, and B, I knew that Eero was it, because I've used Eeros now in a number of different places like this, and it's just the best system. It's easy to set up. It takes 2 seconds. I set it up to match my home network, so all the things would automatically connect to it without me changing anything. And it's so fast. It's so much better than the ISP router that came with the place. I'm just so, I'm that kind of nerd who immediately replaced the Wi-Fi at a rental, but it was worth every second and every penny of it. So give Eero a chance to never think about Wi-Fi again. Get $100 off the Eero base unit and 2 beacons package with 1 year of Eero Plus by using code ATP at checkout. So go to Eero.com, EERO.com/ATP, and use code ATP to get $100 off the package that has the Eero base unit, 2 beacons, and 1 year of Eero Plus. Thank you so much to Eero for sponsoring our show.
Some Ask ATP.
Let's do it.
All right, we start tonight with Marcus Ernst, who writes, how does the recommendation engine in Overcast work? Did you try multiple approaches? Is it some fancy neural network?
I have tried multiple approaches. It is not a neural network or anything remotely fancy like that, primarily because I don't know how to use those things or understand anything about them.
Use CoreML.
I honestly thought about that. CoreML so as CoreML has evolved and other tools that are like CoreML that are more like in the non-Apple worlds, like I think like TensorFlow is one of these things. Forgive me. This is a whole world, the whole world of ML models and everything. I really don't understand much about it, and I'm not familiar with any of the tools or any of the real concepts of it. The main reason I haven't gotten into all this stuff yet is because I haven't really needed to, because I have some data with Overcast. Like I try to keep as little data as possible about people and their behavior and everything, but I do know the list of podcasts that each user subscribes to. So I can do simple correlations like, people who subscribe to this tend to also subscribe to that. Right? Like that's stuff that you don't need fancy ML stuff to do that if you have decent data. And that's all the data you really need to do that. So the recommendation engine, the current one is based on Twitter stuff, and it's like what people subscribe to, who you follow on Twitter. I will give you an exclusive news breaking heads up here. I'm removing that feature. I'm getting rid of the Twitter integration for lots of reasons. Number one, almost nobody uses it, so it's already like on the chopping block for that. And there's a bunch of like liabilities of having Twitter integration, and it causes a lot of confusion among users. I get a lot of support email about people who either don't understand it or wish it behaved differently. And I've actually just rebuilt the recommendation engine over the last couple of weeks using an even better approach. Again, just involving subscription data, like nothing super fancy. But I figured out better algorithms, and so I'm going to ship an update soon. Like still for iOS 12, like before the betas this fall, I'm going to ship an update soon that switches out the Twitter feature for my new recommendation engine. And I've been testing it with some testers here and there, and it has significantly better recommendations for podcasts you might like. So I think it'll be a positive change, and it also allows me to do things which I don't think I'm going to have time to do for this update, but it allowed me to do things like on a podcast's individual page to be able to say, these podcasts are similar to this. Or people who like this also like this. Like it allows me to do all that stuff, and it's a way better engine than the one I had before. And it will allow me to integrate a lot more stuff more nicely into the app, and not have to deal with weird interactions with an increasingly risky and toxic social network.
Paul Wood III writes, what is the best way for you to enter the zone while programming? Do you have any tricks you play on yourself to help you focus? And why do you think that this trick works? For me, it's listening to Daft Punk's Discovery album because I listened to it at my first programming job. I don't have any great tips about getting in the zone, although I will say now that I don't have a office to go to in the traditional sense, I do like once or twice a week going somewhere else to get work done, and I think the change of scenery really does help me. And then, as I think I mentioned several times on this program in the past, I have my secret weapon, which I deploy extremely tactically which is if I have a programming problem that I just can't figure out, Tools 10,000 Days has not yet failed in getting me through that problem. It usually takes one run through or less to get me there, but if I deploy it very tactically, I can usually use that as my secret weapon to solve programming problems. John, how do you get in the zone?
The only thing I've found that works for me consistently, because I think about times in my career when I have had like a difficult programming challenge that I have like put myself to dealing with, either because there was like a hard external deadline or like I was very motivated to do it because I was super into a project or something like that. I think the thing that I've used is not isolation, but removal of distractions. So to give some examples, at one point I was dealing with a particular, I think I've talked about this in the show, I was dealing with a particularly thorny thing having to do with the ebook site that I, for the company I used to work for, it had to do with the complexities of royalty calculations for bundled products for ebooks or whatever. And it was a fairly complicated system, and I'd taken a couple of runs at it, and I just wasn't satisfied that we were solving the problem in an elegant way. So I basically took a weekend, and I said, all I'm going to do this weekend is I'm going to rewrite everything having to do with royalty calculations, right? And everything having to do with product bundles or whatever. And I'm just, that's, because I'd thought about it for like weeks and weeks and months leading up to that point. Like the site was running, it had a thing, but it was unsatisfactory. Like every time a new requirement would come in, it would be a problem. So I'm like, I'm just going to tackle this, right? So I isolated myself for like a weekend, which was a thing I could do before kids, or before kids who were older, because I had one little tiny baby at that point. And just 2 days at home on a weekend, me and the computer. Similarly, I had an earlier job. I had another, like, it was a very complicated system designed by like product designers or like marketing people, essentially. It's like, here's how we want it to work. And they described in like this 17-page Word document, here's how we want the system to work. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to make this thing if I just like come in every day and try to chip away at it, right? So again, I set myself a task, and this time it was at work, but I set myself a task of like, I'm not doing anything else. I'm just going to hide in my then actual office. Those were the days. and
never
just
had one.
For
Never
this
had
week, I am going to turn that 8-page Word document written by non-technical people into an implementation that like matches it exactly, and clarifying all of the ambiguities or whatever, and just spent that week doing it. So every time I feel like I've had to get in the zone and tackle a programming problem, I feel like I've had to shut out distractions and remove context switches. I imagine that's true for most people because it's a common thing that people measure, like the context switches are bad or whatever. But some people may be like, oh, I'd rather be in a cafe or whatever. I'm like, no, I don't want to see or hear any other human. I don't want to see or hear any other noise. It's just going to be me and the computer. Absolutely no distractions. Absolutely no one else there. No music, no sound, no things on in the background, no people walking around, nothing. That's how I get in the zone.
Marco?
Headphones and fish.
Nobody saw that coming.
Surprise!
Mm-hmm. And I would also say, too, the way I work, I don't know if this is true of everybody. I think it might be. The way I work, like I can't really create the zone at will.
Yeah.
I can just recognize when I'm ready for it and encourage it and preserve the state as well as possible. Like it's like the zone is here, and I get a chance to harness it or not harness it. And so when I choose whenever I can to harness it when the opportunity arises, like, when I have that motivation, when I have that focus, whatever causes that mode to happen, I try to recognize when that is happening and preserve that and harness it to get good stuff done. Like when I can tell that I'm in the zone or that I'm able to be in the zone, I'm not going to do things like read Twitter or answer email. Like I'm going to want to harness that to I'm going to ideally apply that to like coding and things that are like more substantial like that, as opposed to just like administrative work or messing around. But I'm not perfect at this, but that is the idea.
Leon Zanman writes, do you have any idea what should or could happen to Overcast and your other endeavors in the unfortunate event of you dying? Maybe a weird/creepy question, but I'm just wondering if and how you, as a one-person's business with paying clients, are handling this. And I thought this was fascinating in no small part because I just heard Independence number 55, the single point of failure, where this exact conversation is discussed. For me, I mean, it's not as big as, and certainly not the financial powerhouse, let's say, that Overcast is. But for Vignette and all the other associated stuff with my business, I have written out kind of the instructions on, hey, if I disappear, where is everything? And that's true not only of the business, but actually my personal life as well. And I've given, copies of those documents to people I trust. And so in the unfortunate event that, I pass away, then both Erin as my wife and Erin as probably the person who will end up dealing with my business's stuff should hopefully be squared away. And I've actually been thinking about writing a blog post about what sorts of information I've included on these documents, because I think it would probably be helpful. So I'll probably get around to that one day. But Marco, what are you doing if, God forbid, something happens to you suddenly?
I mean, my family's taken care of with things like life insurance, but for the actual business, like for Overcast, I don't really have any plans. I'll be dead, so I won't care.
Fair.
I guess people can do whatever they want with it. I don't know. Like I have not put anything in place. I also heard that episode, and I also thought about, like, I wonder if I should, put some process in place here. But I have found that transitions of app ownership rarely really preserve what the app was about and what made it good. And so I don't think it really matters. Like, if I'm gone, Overcast is going to die with me, or is going to be picked up by somebody else and changed in a way that you're all going to hate. So, like, it kind of doesn't really matter, honestly.
That's an interesting point. A couple of years ago, maybe even several years ago now, a friend of the show, _David Smith, went somewhere, and he didn't tell his friends that he was going anywhere, which is fine. Like, he doesn't have to report into us that he's going on a vacation. But he went somewhere, and this is, I think, when Feed Wrangler was fairly new, and something happened. I don't know if you remember this, Marco, but something happened.
I sure do.
When Feed Wrangler basically took a dump, and this was fairly significant, and nobody could get in touch with Dave. And I can only speak for myself, but I was getting increasingly worried about what was going on. And it turned out everything was fine in his world. It's just that, some server had an issue or something like that.
Yeah, and he was just like on vacation, like at a cabin in the woods with no internet connectivity.
Exactly.
But yeah, it was like his server went down like at the worst possible time, basically like right after he left. And so like it was down for a while. And I've taken vacations where I've been offline, and you just kind of assume like, well, I just hope that in the next couple of days my servers don't break, right? And his servers happened to break during that time. And
yep.
But yeah, we all thought the worst.
Yeah, I was genuinely like getting really concerned. Well, anyways, I bring all this up because there was a time when he went on a different trip later, and I genuinely don't know if this is still true or not, but there was a window of time where he had given me like a 400 character password to use, and like the bare bones of server information that I could use to basically like log in and just restart the thing and hope for the best. And I honestly, I'm sure if I have it, it's in one password somewhere, and I don't even know if I do have this information anymore. And even if I do, I doubt it still works. But I thought it was an interesting point that, it may not be terrible to take someone you trust and give them, a key or the keys to the kingdom, just in case something happens. Now, obviously, I wouldn't be able to like properly debug whatever, Dave's issues may be, but I could go in there, like I said, and restart the server and hope for the best. So that's another thing to think about as well if you ever go off the grid. In any case, John, what about you? What have you thought about any of this?
I have no kingdom for which keys must be handed to someone. When I'm dead, nobody cares, and there's nothing that needs to continue.
I'll care.
But there's nothing that needs to keep running. So
fair enough. Well, not hypercritical.co, is that right? It's not com, right?
Nobody cares about that stuff.
Well, you only write on it once a year. So.
That's right. I mean, yeah, I don't have any ongoing endeavors like that. Other than the ones that actually involve me, in which case those, no longer involve me.
Fair enough.
Thanks to our sponsors this week, Eero, Squarespace, and Casper. And we'll see you next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
I so desperately want. I have a favorite spatula. Rubbermaid used to make utensils for some brief period. They no longer do. I have 2 Rubbermaid spatulas, one of which is my favorite spatula, and I cannot find one that is even remotely like it. It's not complicated. It's one piece of Rubbermaid plastic, but it's exactly the right size and shape. Doesn't have any weird places where gunk gets stuck. Like, it's the right flexibility. It's a good spatula. Johnny might even like it, but I have to hope that it never breaks or like accidentally melts on something or whatever, because I can't find a replacement. So yeah, he should make a spatula. It's a perfect Jony Ive thing, because it should be basically like, featureless and white and just like, a simple solid with no moving parts and no ports.
Not white though, because then you like sauce would discolor it.
Mine's not white. It's like an off-white kind of color, and yeah, it is a little bit discolored, right? But it's
right. The amount of tomato sauce you make, of course, it's going to be discolored.
Well, no, it's not. You don't use the spatula and tomato sauce. But anyway, it is mostly like sort of discolored from like Bernie stuff being on it. So it's like a little bit of a brown Bernie stuff. Yeah, like a little bit of a brown speckling, but it's not colored like purple or red or any kind of like food dye color. Ryber in the chat room. Not that. That's a bowl scraper. That's not not that kind of spatula.
You're talking about the pancake turner?
Flipper, if anything, but yes.
Yeah, like it's shaped more like a hockey stick. Yes, you could like get it underneath.
I gotta say the what you're calling like a bowl scraper, I have been using those more
for eggs,
just like as like the thing that you stir stuff in a pan with.
Yeah, that's not the right tool for that job. Please stop doing that.
Honestly, I find like I used to be a wooden spoon person. But ultimately, I find that a good flexible silicone spatula, that what you're calling the bowl scraper kind of spatula, like not the pancake turner with the slots, but like the thing that you would like ice a cake with, like that kind of thing. I have found that is actually a much better tool for stirring stuff around in a pan for most types of things that I'm stirring around in pans. I really enjoy it. I got converted to it a couple of years ago by a friend, and I am solidly in that camp now of like that is the better tool for that job.
This is the thing my wife does, and it drives me nuts, but it is still one step up from the worst thing, which is using silverware.
Yeah, that's definitely the worst thing.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, that's not good.
Please do not use silverware for so many reasons.
Yeah, that I agree with.
Using the wrong cooking tool is a step up from that, and then using the correct tool, of course, is what you should be doing.
Aaron always used to use one of these things that you're describing, Marco, for scrambled eggs. Mm-hmm. And for the longest time, I was like, what the hell are you doing? That's why I use a spatula. And then I tried it once, or I was like, as she started them and left like the little scrapery, plasticky, whatever thing right near the pan. And so I was like, oh, screw it. I'll just use this. I think both you and Aaron are correct for something along those lines.
When you're making eggs, you are, in fact, much of the time scraping the bowl, essentially.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? That actually is closer.
Yeah, especially if you're making scrambled eggs in a nonstick pan, like this thing is perfect because you really do want to get it all off the side. Yeah, like it makes total sense.
So if your pan is properly nonstick, you shouldn't need this, actually. Like this is to get things off the side that are sticking to the side. Really, you should be able to, not even touch it with anything and just flip it, and it should, slide right off, just like in those commercials. But as nonstick degrades, they become less nonstick. They become more stick, and so then you might need a scraper.
Every pan eventually becomes a stick pan.
Mm-hmm. Except for the super duper cast iron thingies. Supposedly, I've never successfully pulled this off, but the theory is the carbonization, long period of time, smooth glassy surface, yada yada.
Yeah, I've never been convinced by the cast iron lifestyle. It seems like it is.
You need a grandma pan. You need a pan that someone's used for 100 years that has that glassy surface that no one has put their stupid metal utensils into and screwed up.
John, click that most recent link in the chat. It's a circa 1972 spatula, so that's right in your wheelhouse in terms of era.
I didn't get... Hey, that's it. That's not the one that I like. That's the big one. The small version of that is my spatula. We also have the big one, and that's what we use for pancakes and stuff, but I'm not married to the big one. I feel like the big one is too big. The small one is maybe like half that width. That is my spatula.
Okay, this is not at all what I thought you meant. And
doesn't it look like a Jony Ive thing, other than obviously the giant Rubbermaid thing, which is why I know it's Rubbermaid, because like you can't not know it's Rubbermaid.
Right.
But that's the only,
So you can't find anything as good as that?
Nope, I cannot.
I hear the skepticism all the way from here.
And again, not the big one, the small one. God, if anyone sees the small one on eBay, I will buy it for a ridiculous price. Like I'm already running low on my my grated cheese, the OXO thing, right?
Oh no, I remember you mentioned that in the past, right? Like you're holding on to an old cheese grater.
I think I have one or possibly two left unopened, but they're lifetime. And my current one, I'm just like, hang on a little bit longer. I'm trying to get the maximum life out of it. I have seen on television a few more like commercial kitchens with electric ones, and that's totally what I want. I want to not do it by hand, but I haven't found a good electric one yet, so I'm always on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, I got to keep my hand ones.
Oh, do you see this Etsy link?
Is it really from the 70s? Yeah, that one in the middle. There, you got it. Right there. That's my spatula. Boom. Is it from the 70s? How could I mean, we bought it after we were
married. So you can buy one for $74.99, John.
We bought it after we were married. So it's not like this is, I mean, maybe they've made it since the 70s, and yeah. Oh, $70.
Jesus, you're actually thinking about it?
I would love so much for you to go back in time to the 70s and explain to your parents or grandparents, whoever bought this, that in 2019 you're going to buy one for $75.
We bought it. We bought it ourselves. Like after we were married, when you're buying like stuff for your house, you got to buy a kitchen table and utensils and like plates and spatulas. And we bought a spatula. Like we just probably went to, whatever the kitchen store and bought a bunch of cheap, we were like in our 20s. We were just married. We didn't have a lot of money. This is not an expensive product. God, I've never seen that weird soup ladle. I'm not really not on board with that probably, but
$75 for this piece of plastic. Good God.
The big and the small spatula. Rubbermaid, why did you stop making these?
Oh, and it's only available in black, apparently. Sorry, John.
Black? Ugh. Yeah,
you can pay $75 and get the Spatula Pro.
Wow. Actually, now that I see it in black, it does look kind of Mac Pro-y.
It also appears, if you go to the very last photo where it's the black one and it's showing the underside, it looks like it might be used. Do you see like that leading edge is...
Oh yeah, they get scraped up. Like mine is like, it's like a cast iron pan where it becomes like you get a patina and sort of like it has seen so much service, because again, I've had it for like 20 years now, that it is like, I don't know, I should take some pictures of it. It's a pretty good looking thing after 20 years.
Now, the real funny thing here is that at the bottom of this listing, it says almost gone. There's only 3 left. I see that as they have 3 of these. That's great. You could spend, $225 and have 3 backup Spatula Pros.
John, you might want to consider it.
What is this picture with the thing with like a spoon with slots in it? I'm not on board with their spoons. I'm also in the market for a good wooden spoon. I have a lot of good wooden spoons, including wooden spoons from my grandmother, which are my best wooden spoons. But wooden spoons eventually do start to check and crack a little bit, right? So a couple of my good wooden spoons have some cracks in them.
Are there advantage of using spatulas instead of wooden spoons? You can put them in the dishwasher.
Oh, we don't put these in the dishwasher. Are you kidding? These never go in the dishwasher. The wooden spoons or the spatulas all wash by hand.
Your things from the 70s probably would melt if you put them in the dishwasher. They're probably...
I don't think they would.
They're probably leaching chemicals into your food when you use them.
They go directly into hot pans. They don't melt. But I wouldn't put them in the dishwasher. No.
It's plastic from the 70s.
It's not from the 70s. It's manufactured like in the late 90s.
Fine. I wouldn't put plastic from the 90s into my food today.
Don't worry about it. It's fine.
It's not fine. We know factually it's not fine.
Not all plastic is toxic.
Yeah, but like
only the stuff they use for water bottles.
Yeah, right.
This is not a water bottle.
And plastic, like, it degrades and leaches weird chemicals out of itself over time. Like that, it's not a good. Like this is not good. Yeah.
In John's defense, I think I misread 1972 as a release year, not a model number, because apparently that is a model number.
There you go.
But it does say on this listing, item details, vintage from before 2000, which is now basically 20 years ago.
It's vintage. Yeah, it's vintage from when I was married in the 90s.
It's 20 years ago.
All three of us are quite vintage at this point by these definitions.
Wow, that's good to go. Looking at the little codes in the back, I should look. Probably that code is in the back of mine. It's got the recycle symbol on it, yeah.
So there you go. Rubbermaid 1971 spatula.
Is it the 71? I can't tell what number. I'll go look at mine.
You should go right now.
I want those spatulas.
You're really thinking about spending $75 on this thing, aren't you?
I mean, here's the thing. My current ones are fine. They're not broken, and unlike my cheese grater, there's not like a shelf life where I know this is going to break in 3 years. They've never broken, but I fear one day, something happening to it, someone leaving it on a burner and it actually does melt or something like that. And people are sending me links to other things on Amazon that are not my spatula. This is not my spatula. I've seen these in the store. This is not what I want.
I think you have to buy this. You have to get Spatula Pro for $75.
I think you might be right.
The only question is how many.
Yeah. Which utensil? Narrow spatula, $74.99. No, I'm not going to do. I gotta keep my powder dry for the Mac Pro.
I mean, just think about how many of these spatulas you could buy.
The white is sold out anyway. I would have to get the black one. Yeah, no, forget it. No. The Pro one looks cool, but it clashes with everything else. It's not. I like to see the food stuff stuck to it. If it's black, it's hard to see what kind of gunk is on there.